the $600,000 speedboat. Okay, so right before our Corzine interview, we're gonna do that at the very end. Okay, so that's coming up. Again, I know boats, folks, and I've seen this boat. You can buy 6 of these for the same price. Just another example of government corruption. We've got our reporters out in Austin to show you a $600,000 drug interdiction boat. That's coming up. But let's hit this final point before we go to our interview. UN calls for eco-fascist world government at Durban Summit. International Climate Court of Justice, they're calling for carbon taxes, carbon rations on each individual citizen. Just an absolute tyranny where you are literally not going to piss in the commode without some UN communist bureaucrat telling it's okay. Brainwashing of your kids, cutting off energy to the third world, 1 billion dead. We're going to be breaking this down in just a moment with our guest. And with more on these globalist bureaucrats trying to set up their little eco-dictatorship, we're joined by Lord Christopher Monckton, the leading expert and champion of exposing this 21st century authoritarianism that looked invincible just 5 years ago, but is now flailing in its apparent death throes, but still clinging to life and still as dangerous as ever, unfortunately. And with him in Durban, South Africa, where they're having this conference, is Mark Moreno of Climate Depot, the leading group here in the United States. And, of course, he's been an advisor to the Congress as well. Lord Monckton, of course, was one of the chief advisors to Margaret Thatcher. He's a journalist and researcher as well as an inventor. And, again, he joins us from this International Climate Court of Justice. Now they have courts, and we must pay a price to the earth, which means paying money to Al Gore and others. Lord Monckton, thank you for joining us.
It's a real pleasure, Alex. In fact, the authoritarianism of the UN knows no bounds. On entirely arbitrary grounds, they tried to ban me from the conference once I arrived here. So I went away and we got a plane and I dropped in by parachute instead. And they weren't used to dealing with that. And it's had massive publicity around the world, and the UN is now looking very silly indeed for having tried to ban me on an entirely trumped-up nonsense, which they've now had to back off from.
Well, that's amazing, and this isn't the first time they've tried this, is it?
No, they're always doing this. The fact is that we are now the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, which is the environmental charity that I come here with, which has real projects to help the poor people of Africa and of Latin America. It's not just a pressure group. They are the only organization here which disagrees with what I'm going to call the Marxist party line, what they would call the scientific consensus. Let's call it what it is, the Marxist party line on this whole climate nonsense. And so they always do harass us. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago in Bali, where I had booked a room for press conferences through the UN Secretariat, we were in a press conference one day, very well attended, when along came the chief of the Secretariat and said, "You can't have press conferences in this room." And I said, "Well, we booked these in good faith." And they said, "We don't care, yours is the wrong message, and we'll have you arrested if you go on giving out the wrong message." That's the kind of thing that the UN does to us every time. And you may remember in Copenhagen last year, I was knocked out by a policeman, not sure whether he was a Danish policeman or a UN policeman, but either way, I was hit from behind while walking away from the policeman in question. There's no doubt they do not like hearing home truths about how their little scientific scam and fraud is collapsing, and how even if they were right on the science, the near unanimous view in the peer-reviewed literature is that, economically speaking, it's better to sit back, enjoy the sunshine, and do nothing. But the real breaking news here at this conference, Alex, is the extraordinary story that in the 138-page document to which the UN's bureaucrats fondly think the various member states, all 194 of them, of the Framework Convention on Climate Change are going to agree, there are now provisions for protecting the rights, not of people, not of animals, not of plants, but of Mother Earth. We're now in straightforward, old-fashioned superstition territory now. The rights of Mother Earth, and they're going to be enforced against the West only, by a new international climate court run by the UN with absolute power to order Western countries such as the United States to hand over money and to run their economies and their environments in whatever way the so-called court is.
Sir, I want to go through this as you join us from South Africa, but just 2 or 3 months ago, the UN said we want green helmets that will invade your country. So now the UN and NATO will put some rebels in and then claim that they're a democratic group, and NATO bombards and calls it peace, and the peace president gets behind it, Obama. And they're talking about another peace prize because how great these so-called peace wars are. And so I've also seen cases where these UN carbon credits, as you know, in South America, Central America, and Africa, mainstream, even New York Times admits that they come in and kill the locals to take their property to then plant trees on it to save the earth. I mean, isn't this just a new excuse for select globalist corporate colonialism to invade and take over land, but also then shut down real free market companies, as we see power plants being shut down now all over the U.S., and they're now admitting, okay, your prices are going up?
That's right. Let's try and deal with the business of invading people's villages and moving out or killing the villagers. This has happened not that far from here in Uganda, where large areas of land were cleared so that the government of Uganda could claim, quite falsely, that the land was being used as what is called a carbon sink. And all of this is the kind of nonsensical, topsy-turvy, false accounting that leads to these ghastly actions where goons from governments and from the UN go in and shoot people who are on land that they want to take over and turn into a so-called carbon sink. This is becoming rather frightening, Alex. As you know, I often have to calm you down and say, no, it's not as bad as all that. Fact is that this UN conference has gone far, far further than any other in what is essentially a sustained, malevolent attack on the Free West. The entire agreement is framed so that there is no question of democratic election of this world government that they're so rapidly establishing. The 1,000 new bureaucracies that were created at Cancun are now all beavering away to undermine the West like termite ants. All of this is going on, and the most extreme document I've ever read is this latest one with its criminal court, with its rights of Mother Earth, with the right of small island states to survive the rising sea level, which, incidentally, Alex, has been rising at a dizzying rate equivalent to 2 inches per century over each of the last 8 years, according to the latest satellite. So that's not going to give them much problem, is it? So all of this fiction and all of this fraud is now being encapsulated in one giant document, which now says they, in effect, want to make the world colder by 2 Celsius degrees, which is 3 Fahrenheit degrees. It's quite a big drop. You're getting kind of on for a third of the way back to the last ice age if you do that. That would kill hundreds of millions, but that's what the lunatics, and that's the only word I can think of to describe them, the lunatics here, are arguing for. They're arguing that carbon dioxide concentration should now be cut back to effectively not much more than 200 parts per million. And that is the point at which plants and trees die because they don't have enough carbon dioxide.
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there because
it's quite extraordinary.
I mean, this is incredible. Well, I want you to really bore down into this because it's important. You're there. You've gotten the document. You're breaking it down. You were instrumental at the Copenhagen event, helping get the document where they called for world government and almost doubling the cuts on carbon emissions. The third world that is an admitted, billion dead people over a decade, death sentence. This is really almost a military attack on infrastructure, on energy that a foreign enemy, that Stalin or Hitler could never have dreamed of achieving. And when you look at the carbon cycle, sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, they've picked carbon dioxide because folks know sunlight's good, water's good, and that oxygen's good. So they literally are teaching kids that carbon dioxide's evil. They have all these video games where they fight carbon dioxide monsters. But I want you to go back to what you just said and go over this document. This is breaking news at your Science and Public Policy website and at INFOWARS as well. but and you guys are there in South Africa covering this, where they're openly saying they've said geoengineer things if need be, because I know the world's already in a very low carbon dioxide rate from what it's been in past millennia, and actually cut it. I mean, these people, it's like a science fiction movie, like they're demons from hell or something.
What they are, Alex, is certifiably insane. There's really no other way of describing it. To want to make the planet 2 degrees cooler, which is effectively what their target now means. To want to take the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere down to the point where trees and plants will die. To do these things and to say that Western emissions of carbon dioxide must begin to decline immediately, and we must cut by, get this, more than 100% by 2050. So there'll be no coal-fired power stations, no automobiles, no oil-fired power stations, no gas-fired power stations, no industry, no hospitals. We will be straight back to the Stone Age, Alex, if they get away with this nonsense, and without even the right to light a carbon-emitting fire in our caves. And if we misbehave, the International Climate Court will be there to order the troops in to make sure that we shut down our industries as just as fast and as completely as this latest draft requires. Now, here is the really odd thing about this, Alex. I'm not making this stuff up. You may think this is so extreme that Monkton must have finally flipped his top and gone completely mad, or banged his head on landing off his parachute. But no, I haven't. All of this is actually in the document that I got from the UN's Documentation Center, and it was available, provided you knew to ask for it, to any journalist who wanted a copy of it. Not one of them, anywhere in the world, as far as I know, has reported the details that you'll find at scienceandpublicpolicy.org, at climatedepot.org, on your website, INFOWARS.com. We are the few people that are telling the world what is in this document. Now, there's no incentive to me to make this stuff up, because if I did, people would look at the document and say, oh no, it's just all fiction, he's just making it up. All of this is actually there. It is plainly of interest to the peoples of the West, so that readers of the Times of London, the Times of New York, etc., would surely be intrigued to know this stuff. And yet, and here's the really sinister thing, not a word of any of this is appearing in print. Why do you think that is, Alex? Because I can't work it out.
Well, this is what's happened. You got the secret Copenhagen text and torpedoed it. You helped publicize the emails that got leaked. And we've had several climate gates since then. I think it's fleeing forward. Instead of trying to get the incremental power grab, they see, and they've got national and international polls, as you know, coming out, that it's flipped completely. In some cases, higher than 80% know it's pure bull. People have now discovered... they've now discovered that China makes no cuts, India, Mexico, 100 plus other third world countries. We all make cuts in the West. They know it's a death sentence to our industry, and they know insiders like General Electric that are on the President's Council, the same in your country, are exempt. So they know what it is, a mafia power grab. These people aren't even well-meaning socialists at the end of the day. These are cold-blooded mafia people. So I think you've answered your own question. They're operating by stealth now and going for it all. I mean, is that what you're seeing, or is that what your gut is? I mean, what's the sense of them this time as they lash out and try to ban you from the conference? I mean, are they showing even more fear of you and Mark Moreno than they normally do?
They are absolutely terrified. I went to see Negumi Endo, who is the UN official that sent me an email arbitrarily saying, you've been banned. She didn't even say why I'd been banned. She just said, we hope you will accept that this ban was appropriate, without